I'll welcome our first speaker. So Terry Ireland is biologist, ecologist? Biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service out of Grand Junction. And so he focuses on at-risk and imperiled species, including pollinators. So he's going to give you some background of some of our most imperiled pollinators here in Colorado.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. Well, good morning. I am going to focus on a couple of the butterflies that I'm most familiar with. And I'd just like to say we're, in my branch, which is Ecological Services, we are kind of species focused. And I have not really immersed myself in the pollinator world, so I am here to learn as much as anything. And I have already learned about all these great organizations out here, so it's already been very useful for me coming here. So hopefully I can provide a few interesting tidbits for you on a couple species here. So let's get going. So I'm going to talk about the status and conservation of the Uncompaghre fritillary butterfly and the Silverspot butterfly. Before I dive deep into that, I just want to give a brief overview of some listed species or species under review that we've listed under the Endangered Species Act. We have 40 species of butterflies, skippers, and moths, and this is nationally and throughout the territories. We have about 9 or 10 that are under review that we're considering for listing. And one that's not on this list, I actually stole this slide and the next one from somebody else, but they don't have the Silverspot butterfly that I'm going to be talking about on there. I think that is a picture of the regal Fritillary, which is on the list. We also have some listed bees. There's 7 in Hawaii, Rusty Patch and Franklin's bumblebee, and then there are several bumblebees and a poppy bee that we also have under review. There's also some bats that we have listed. I think there's 4 bats, and there's also a number of Hawaiian birds that are pollinators that are listed. Unfortunately, one bat, I recently found out the little Mariana bat was just declared extinct, so that's too bad. All right, let's jump into the Uncompaghre fritillary butterfly. It was first discovered in 1978 and described in 1980, so it's one of the, if not the, newest butterfly species out there. Is listed as endangered in 1991, and Dr. Paul Oppler was actually the primary author of the listing rule and put that on the list. We decided that critical habitat was not prudent because we didn't want to pinpoint the locations for unscrupulous collectors. And at the time, we only knew of 2 colonies, so is pretty rare as far as we knew at the time. In the meantime, since listed, I've been the lead for writing 3 5-year reviews, which look at the status of the species, and based on that, we make a determination if we want to downlist or delist. But we have decided to still leave it as endangered at this point. All right, the threats to the butterfly, as I mentioned, collection was the primary reason that we listed it. And we only had 2 colonies at the time. Inadequate regulatory mechanisms was also a reason. We did have some pre-listing conservation actions I'll get into just a minute, but we felt that there's additional protection that was needed, afforded through the ESA. Other potential threats were climate change, small population size, low genetic variability, and trampling of larvae by livestock or researchers or hikers. So currently, we know of 11 colonies. So since its listing, we have found 9 more. Pretty sure we've kind of maxed out. We've actually done a lot of searching over the years. We have 3 out of those 11 populations that we quantitatively monitor, and this graph shows estimated recruitment or abundance. As you can see, we don't have 2023 yet, but 21, 22, we're kind of about in the average range. So, you know, a lot of the colonies are doing okay, at least the monitored ones, but some of them aren't doing great. In fact, one of the monitored ones isn't contributing much to this chart here. It's really two of the 3, and then we have a couple other colonies that aren't doing great either. But as you can see, in 2007, we had this huge spike, and I remember Paul telling me when I first started working on this species that insects will have these very large spikes some years, and a lot of times we don't know why, and that's exactly what happened. We still don't know why we had this big spike. You know, just the guess on the environmental components came together and it created a really good year for the butterfly. But we haven't been able to tie it back to climate, even though we've looked. So not quite sure, but happy that they had a great year, and it's been kind of average for the last few years here. So I mentioned we had some pre-listing conservation actions. Forest Service closed Mount Uncompaghre to collecting before we listed it. Forest Service and Colorado Natural Areas Program investigated and eventually designated a natural area around Mount Uncompaghre. The BLM closed sheep grazing on Red Cloud Peak, which is the second and most well-known colony. And then all the colonies are fully or partially in wilderness areas. So that affords them a little bit more protection as well. But we decided that that wasn't quite enough to prevent listing. And so we ended up listing it. And the first big project I was handed was to develop the recovery plan for the butterfly. And as Adrian showed on one of the slides there at the bottom, it said that Paul was part of the recovery plan, and he was indeed a big part of that. He helped a lot. You know, he knew more than anybody at the time about the butterfly. And he participated for a number of years on the recovery plan, or recovery team, excuse me. We have annual meetings still, and he participated on those for quite a while. So, as a main part of our recovery plan, we have downlisting and delisting criteria, and they're really recommendations, as is everything in a recovery plan, actually. And so our downlisting criteria was that we needed 2 colonies, and they needed to be stable for 10 years and have the threats removed. And again, you know, at the time we only knew of the 2, so that's part of the reason we just had 2 colonies as the criteria there. For our delisting recommendation, we said that we should have 10 colonies stable for 10 years. And frankly, at the time, we never thought we'd reach 10 colonies, so we're quite happy that we've actually gotten to 11 now. We did not do species status assessment, or SSA, because at the time that was actually both listing and recovery plan were way before we even started that process. But we may do one because we might update the recovery plan at some point. It was completed in 1994, so it is getting rather old, and there's a few things we could change in there. So we might do a species status assessment, which brings the biology together, and we also look at the current condition of the species and try to make predictions with future condition scenarios as well. And we can use SSAs for both recovery plans as well as a basis for our listing decisions. So that's kind of the newfangled way of doing business that's come about in the last 5 to 7 years. All right, there's 9 major recovery actions in the recovery plan. I'm not going to read through all these. The 7 I have highlighted are ones that we've done activities under. We've not tried propagation or reintroduction yet at this point. As I mentioned, we do have a couple colonies and sub-colonies. Some of these have little metapopulation dynamics going on. We have 2 or 3 colonies that have almost no butterflies left, or we haven't found any for 3 or 4 years. So we're getting rather concerned about that, and so propagation, reintroduction may be something that we'll consider in the future. I would like to have a few more genetics before we get into those activities, but we may in fact want to do that. Okay, and under some of these major actions, we've had activities including qualitative monitoring. So we go out to all of our colonies every year just for a presence-absence look. 8 of the colonies, that's all we do. And we have a fairly limited number of people that go out there. Western Colorado University has been instrumental in this, and one of their professors has been the crew leader for a number of years. He just recently moved on, so we have a new crew leader, but he's still out of Western Colorado University, and they get their students to help, but it's hard to get them everywhere, and we've discussed having volunteers, but due to the difficulty of getting into some of these sites and just the oversight that's needed, we haven't reached out and had a ton of volunteers at one time. It'd be a little bit difficult to manage everybody and send everybody back to some of these backcountry areas. So we've basically had a crew of about 4 or 5, and they'll get to these backcountry sites for 1 or 2 days a year, or maybe a couple times for 1 or 2 days. And then they'll also do quantitative monitoring at the 3 colonies that we do that at. And so they'll set up transects. You can see on this picture here, we got some flags there. That's part of their transect. And they will have a pole that they will hold as they walk down the transect, and they'll do distance sampling out from the center area. And Western Colorado University professors and some of their staff there work their magic and come up with detection probabilities and calculate the abundance for us. We've also done life history studies very early on in the early 90s. Some of our first crew leaders looked at life history. We've more recently looked at the water sources and found that the primary water source was not the summer monsoon rains, but was in fact snowpack. So some of the snow kind of slowly melts from some of these big banks of snow that we have there, and just kind of continually feeds the colonies. So snowpack is definitely important, something to be concerned about with climate change. And related to climate change, we've done some microhabitat research relating to nectar plants, soil moisture, temperature, slope, and elevation, and have tried to figure out exactly what these butterflies need. Snow willow is their larval host plant, but it occurs over a much broader area than where the butterfly occurs. So we've always been trying to figure out, okay, where are these butterflies really focusing in on? So we have some of those answers, and through some of this study have also determined, where some potential vulnerabilities are for these butterflies, such as climate change and snowpack. We've also done some suitable flight conditions, what temperature, what the light condition is, wind condition. We've done a few consultations under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act with other federal agencies on grazing, primarily one or two mining things that didn't affect the species. And then we've also done some genetic material collection. So we started some gene flow analysis, but only really were able to do about 3 colonies at a time, and hope to expand that into the future. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a sec here. And let's see here. Did I skip over something? Maybe not. Anyways, so I guess I'll talk about it now. Sorry. So we would like to do more taxonomic study as well as gene flow within the Uncompaghre butterfly itself. Ever since it was listed, there's been controversy over whether it is a full species or whether it's a subspecies under Pollinator proba. And the Pollinator probas go all the way from Colorado way over to Finland, and we actually have genetic samples over to Finland. Paul Oppler, has worked in the Gillette Museum at CSU and has a very extensive collection of these, and so we have most of them. We're hoping that Dr. Nick Grishin, who has helped on the Silverspot butterfly, which I'll talk next, hopefully we'll be able to get him some money to do this additional analysis for the taxonomy, and he's hoping he can get to the McGuire Center in Florida and maybe pick up some Russian samples, which is kind of a little gap in our range there. So I only have 15 minutes, so I better hurry up here because I see I'm already over. So some remaining challenges, we've had increased recreation, especially at some of our major colonies on Uncompaghre and Red Cloud Peak. Sometimes we'll get trail braiding, and so the Forest Service and BLM have been good about moving the trails out of the habitat. We kind of skirt around them or go through some very narrow areas, but we still have to repair some of the braiding, and they've done that. And we have signs that say please stay on the trail. We do have some people who like to just kind of bomb it straight down when they come back down through the colonies, and so our researchers will ask them to please stay on the trail. Haven't seen too much impact, but with the increase in recreation is something that we always need to keep in mind. Uncompaghre Peak, the Forest Service did not actually close sheep grazing. It's something that's been discussed with permittees in the past, but every once in a while we need to get with them again, and lo and behold, this year there was a ton of sheep out there. You can see above that rock scree, those are not rocks, those are actually all sheep. So we had quite a few of them out there this year. And we've told the Forest Service in the past, we think it's okay if they trail through fairly quickly. They do munch on flowers on the way, but we don't want them bedding there because then they'll eat more of the nectar sources for the butterfly and perhaps trample the larvae. And this year the permittee apparently was not informed, and so they went on there. So we're getting with the permittee and his herders and have a map, and we're saying, please, stay out of this area. So hopefully that will solve it for once and for all. Again, we need some funding for genetic analysis for the taxonomy and gene flow within the Uncompaghre butterfly itself, so that we can, if we do decide to do some reintroductions or transplants, we will have a better idea of how the colonies are connected and maybe where we can move some butterflies. Of course, climate change is probably our biggest remaining challenge. And, if the weather creates a condition where the habitat is not suitable for the butterfly, then it doesn't make sense to even try to reintroduce them because they won't survive. So that's a big challenge, obviously. I don't know if we'll be able to do something about that or not, but I'm hoping we will. All right, let's jump into the silverspot butterfly. Is actually a silverspot, Spira nocomis nocomis. It's a subspecies. There's probably, 15 other silver spots. And so that's why we call it a silver spot. It was described in 1862 by Edwards, so it's been described much longer than the Uncompaghre. There's been a number of subspecies that have been named in the past based on morphology. These butterflies do have some hybridization that goes on, and so you have different morphological characteristics, and so it has been difficult for people to pick out what's what exactly. So we actually had this butterfly on our candidate list up until 1996, but the reason that we took it off was that the morphology and genetics were a little confusing. Nobody quite knew what was what, and so we decided, we don't have enough evidence to say it's a valid species or subspecies, and so we took it off. And then we got petitioned in 2013, and the first thing I said was, well, do we have new genetics, in the meantime? No, we did not. So I got some money together and sent that to Dr. Grisham. Paul Oppler is actually the one who introduced me to Dr. Grisham. And I don't know if you guys know him, but he has done quite a bit of butterfly genetics. He's done a lot. So we were fortunate to be able to get him money, and so he did a genomic study which looks at all the DNA and determined that there are 5 subspecies in 10 major populations in the US and 3 subspecies fully in the US, 5 throughout the range. 2 of those fully or primarily occur in Mexico. 3 of the major populations are hybrids, and we couldn't fit them neatly into any one of the 5 subspecies. So we have kind of these weird hybrid populations that are just kind of sitting out there that we cannot list under the Endangered Species Act. We cannot list populations as we define it in the ESA of insects. We can only go down to subspecies. So species or subspecies is what we can list under ESA for insects. And Nokomis is kind of interesting in that 5 of the major populations that Dr. Grisham found are actually composed of Nokomis nokomis itself, which is interesting. And then we have 10 populations that we identified as defined in the species status assessment within the range of Nokomis nokomis. So there's a couple layers of genetics here, so it's a little confusing. Anyways, that's what we, the range is composed of 10 populations. And we decided based on the information in the SSA that we should propose it as threatened, and we did so in May of 2022. All right, the major threats to silverspot are habitat loss and fragmentation, as usual, hydrologic alteration. Water supports the bog violet, which is a larval host plant for the species, and so that's extremely important. Grazing, if there's too much or too little, it can be an issue. Genetic isolation. Dr. Grisham, the reason that we were able to establish these 10 populations is that Dr. Grisham did find some genetic differences between the populations, at least 8 of the 10. 2 of them we established based on distance from each other. Of course, climate change is also an issue. We haven't found direct evidence except maybe one population that is, but just like with the Uncompaghre butterfly, and especially with this butterfly requiring water for its host plant, it's undoubtedly going to be more of an issue in the future. All right, a couple more slides here. So a couple things that we're doing, and I'm calling this preliminary recovery activities. Basically, it's my idea for recovery if we list it. Our headquarters office is currently looking at the draft final listing rule, and we should come out with a decision probably within 6 months or so. And if we do list it, then I would like to continue bog violet and silverspot surveys. We did quite a few surveys this year. And if we find that we don't have colonies within 5 to 20 air miles of each other, then I'd like to try some restoration and creation of habitat. Our experts think that if the populations are more than 5 miles away from each other, they have a very low chance of finding each other. So I'd like to go out, do a lot of bog violet surveys, determine where those are at, and if we're having big gaps, then maybe try to restore and create habitat in between so the butterflies can be reconnected once again, since we have evidence that maybe they've lost some of their connection. We also will try propagation experiments with bog violet. Tilley et al. In 2021 came out with a good playbook on how to propagate the violet, so that'll be very handy in those efforts. And then we need to determine and implement best methods for the butterfly reintroduction as well, whether we try to get larvae or whether we try that with adults. And I have one area that is a historic area that is on public land that would be suitable for that, so that'll probably be our first experiment. All right, last slide. Land, water, conservation, management are obviously going to be very important. Most of the populations occur on private land. Some occur on public, but most on private, so it'll be important to work with private landowners on this species. And we'll need to implement some land protection, whether that's acquisition or conservation easements. We'll also need to protect or manage water so we can keep delivering water to the colonies. Grazing management, again, some is good, but too much is not. So we'll need to talk with landowners about what they're doing currently and what we can do in the future. Native and exotic vegetation management, burning, grazing, mowing even is likely necessary to keep the populations going. I'd like to plant some native thistles. Just about every picture you see of a silverspot is on a thistle. That's their favorite nectar source. But a lot of them are bull thistles or canna thistle or other non-natives. So I'd like to try to maybe get some swamp thistles or other natives back in some of these wet meadow areas. And then lastly, we don't have much information on effects from pesticides on the silverspot, but they do occur at lower elevation around ranching areas where there's hay fields and stuff primarily. We don't have a lot of cropland around there, but we do have hay fields, and so I'd like to get with landowners and ask them about their pesticide use and maybe start investigating that, and also determining if we have pesticides getting blown in from elsewhere. So, all right, with that, I better quit. I think I'm over time already. Sorry for getting us off to a late start here. And I will be around at lunch, or I can probably stick around for half an hour at the end of the day too if anybody has questions. So thank you.